and go ahead and get started with the presentation. Do you see our presentation now? Okay, all right. I hope I don't get lost in it again. So, and thank you, Diane and Katie, for your help. If I get stuck again, I may be crying help. So anyway, okay. So Darren, you had, oh, Diane, did you start the recording again? Would you please? Okay, thanks. So Darren, what we just left off with was Darren was talking about the process, that we don't generally just start out with the police at the front door or at the location where you're meeting, that's usually kind of the worst case scenario, and that happens further on down the line. And so, Darren, I interrupted you. Did you have anything else you needed to add to what you were saying?
I did not.
Okay, all right, thank you. Okay, so here are other things to be aware of. And we have the tiered, our blueprint for a safer economy, our tiered system that the entire state is under. There's also the county health orders, which ever is most stringent is what we have to follow here in California. These are going to vary from county to county. I think what we're seeing in California, Darren, I'm not sure how things are working in the other parts of the country, but in California, we're seeing little bits of things happening, opening up from, one county to the next. I think Orange County opened up restaurants last weekend, and I believe here in Riverside County, we're getting ready to open up some more restaurants. So you really need to know what is happening from county to county. The best way to do that is to just, I've found, unless you're an attorney like Darren, call your county health department. I have gotten lost in so many wormholes trying to compare what the CDC says to the state says to what the county, all the little links on the county health departments are sending me to. Do you know, is there a better way, Darren, to do that?
No, but I would describe wormholes as an excellent example. California is not the worst state for giving updates and having you try to figure out what's going on, but it's certainly not the best state.
Okay, all right. Well, that's small comfort, but I'm glad my experience is similar. It's a wormhole, and even if you do have a plan that you think is going to be workable, try to have a plan B, because things change so quickly, and we saw that over the summer, just how quickly things changed. We were opening up, and then everything, I felt like the rug was pulled out from under our feet when they closed everything down. So have a plan B, because things can change with very little notice. So this is where, Darren, I'm really going to be relying on you a lot for some of these legal explanations, because I know the answers, but I'm not going to be able to give a real good why like you will be. So, what if we, okay, so you're a group, you want to open, you have a 501c3. Shouldn't that exempt you? Is that protective?
Okay, well, the short answer is no. Okay. The long answer is 501c3 is simply a recognition from the federal IRS that you are an educational, charitable, or religious organization. I work for a 501c3, HSLDA. We have another 501c3, actually a couple of them here on campus, Patrick Henry College and Parental Rights Foundation. All of us have to follow the rules that Virginia has for businesses, in our case, or schools, in Patrick Henry College's case. So I don't think you can see it, but I've got my mask right over there that I have to use when I go out into the common areas here, because that's what Virginia requires. Here in my office, I don't need it. But if you go up and down the office hallways here, you'll find a lot of dark offices because teleworking is encouraged. Actually, what it says is businesses have to encourage teleworking if their employees can actually do it. That's even though we're a 501c3. So we have to follow the rules, whatever those rules are. 501c3 has to do with taxes. If you have a 501c3, congratulations, you don't need to pay taxes on your income. And if someone gives money to you, they can take it off on their taxes. That's what 501c3 does. It doesn't mean that you're a religious organization. As an example, the American Civil Liberties Union is a 501c3. It doesn't claim to be religious. It's a public benefit group. It doesn't mean that you are a church. It doesn't mean that you're automatically a school. I mean, HSLDA is not a school. Patrick Henry College is. If your group is a 501c3 and it files an affidavit with the Department of Education for, 50 kids or 100 kids or whatever, yeah, you are a school, but it's not the fact that you've been recognized as a 501c3 that makes you a school. So it's not like a magic shield that it protects you from from not having to follow the rules. It's just a tax classification.
Okay, so
Now,
it's not the same as being a church, and I think that's what some group leaders are thinking. But hey,
correct, but if I could interrupt, Rebecca, it's also, as someone just said in the chat, some people think that 501c3 means that they're automatically a corporation, and that is another level of protection. It doesn't mean that you get to ignore the rules, but it does mean if someone sues, they aren't suing you personally, they're suing the corporation. But 501c3 and corporation are two different things. One's with the state, one's with the federal government.
Okay. All right. Great. Thank you. And I can't see the chat while I'm screen sharing. So I apologize if you're asking me specific questions. And I'll put some links in later on in the chat when we're having our discussion time, like links to the safer rules for safer economy, or whatever that is here in California, that 4-tiered system. So, and I'll try to answer questions, anything hanging out in the chat then too. So here's another one, ministry of a church. If your homeschool group is the ministry of a church, can you open? Are you exempt? Are you safe to gather, so to speak? And I think one of the questions really is the church opening? Is the church in compliance or working with the CDPH to open? Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Do you feel comfortable with that, Darren, being we're in California?
I'll just say a little bit about it, and then I'll shoot it back to you. Churches, one of the reasons that they've been allowed to open more than some other organizations or businesses is a lot because you're having people get together only once a week for an hour or two, spaced apart, masks coming in, sanitizer stations, and then you separate and go home. If your co-op is operating kind of like that, I see this as a good defensible position if someone tries to shut you down, to say, nope, we're doing exactly what the church does. We're a ministry of the church. One of the elders is on our board. We have the same background checks that the church has to do. For all practical purposes, the church is meeting on Sunday and the church is meeting on Monday, and we're all following the same rules. I think that's defensible. Is the Department of Health going to agree with that? Part of that is going to depend on what is your church's relationship with the Department of Health.
Okay, yeah. Are they friends? This is a good time to start drawing on those relationships, isn't it? If you've had good relationships with the health department and good relationships with the law enforcement agencies. You said something that now I kind of wonder if I should have changed my notes, because I said if the church is and you're following the same meetings and guidances, you should be able to safely meet. But you said that word, the D word, Darren, which I think is really important, defensible. And that's something that you don't hear a lot of people say, hey, that's defensible, or unless you're an attorney. So what does that mean?
It's the lawyer's way of saying fine without saying fine. or it's a range of stuff. It means, yeah, I think so, but HSLDA is not, we don't defend groups, so we're not going to be the lawyer defending your group. So yeah, I would actually agree with your note. I think you should be able to safely meet, with the caveat, your Department of Health may not agree with that, and you are going to need to find a lawyer to defend you in that case. But I think you can find a lawyer who will be glad to defend you if you are a ministry of the church, meeting with all the same requirements that the church is meeting, and the church is meeting legally. I think you can find a lawyer. Unfortunately, you're then going to have to pay that lawyer. That's what I mean by defensible.
Defensible, yeah. So that, and the church and the homeschool group would then be shouldering that expense, which might come at the expense of other activities or programs that you might have been doing otherwise. And I thought also it's interesting to note that the fine would go to the church, correct? Not necessarily the homeschool group. So the fines would be levied towards where the location where you're meeting.
Well, if you're a ministry of the church, I mean, the fine would go to the church. You're all one bank account.
Right.
Robert just posted that San Diego County has said it's only the worship service unless it's essential to the church, like, as he points out, Bible school and Sunday school. And this is one of those things which, when California started, they actually went with the CDC guidelines, which used the word, I think it was, faith communities or communities of faith. I mean, that's a big loophole. And the counties are now starting to say, well, actually, no, what we mean is you get together on Saturday and Sunday for an hour, and then you go home and you don't come back.
Yeah, it's a tough one, because I had read also in one of the state, as I said, when I was following a wormhole, and it had to do with churches and, faith communities. I think it was tribal and, cultural or something like that. I couldn't even find something that said churches is what churches should do initially, but that even the community outreaches and education programs were not really permitted at this time. And that's something you need to talk about, with your church and with an attorney, is where do we fit in this, in this part of the program. So I just really want to encourage each of you. We're not going through this because we want to bomb everybody out and blow away your big plans. We just want you to know, as leaders, where you stand. Remember, as I said, to count the cost. You need to know if you should decide that you're going to meet, you need to be prepared. So, okay, here's another one. Most of the Christian organizations within our network, I mean, they start their meetings with prayer and very often worship. In my homeschool group, we always had a time of worship. We had a board member open in prayer. We had a time of worship, and then even a devotional many times. And then we took care of business. So isn't that like church, like having church? And what if we do it at somebody's house? It's private property. So, the question is, does that qualify you as a community of faith? Is that, here we go again with that word, is it, defensible? In most churches, in most counties, churches are meeting outside. So I don't know, is that defensible, Darren? Where does that fall in the?
We have a saying here at HSLDA, when we're trying to give advice to a homeschool family. We use what we call the 50-year-old judge rule. If you have to go in and make your argument to a 50-year-old judge who hears everything from family law to criminal law to wills to trust to whatever, and you have to explain our co-op, PSP or whatever is a church because we have a time of prayer and worship before we do our algebra class and our English and our history and our field trip. I'm almost 50 myself. That doesn't really pass the smell test to me. On the other hand, if this is a fine that's being levied, which is if it might be criminal, it might be civil, depending on how far down the road we are. Courts are willing to bend a little more on, interpreting the criminal law very, very stringently. However, they're also inclined to bend a lot when it comes to, does this have something to do with the state making pandemic proclamations? Okay, then we'll go along with that. Is your co-op a church? If it's actually gathering for worship and then you're going home, yeah, I think you've got a very good argument. I think you're a church at that point. If you're gathering for a 15-minute chapel and then an hour of math and an hour of history and an hour of science and then going home, you may be able to find a lawyer who will say, yep, that sounds like a church to me. Does it make you a community of faith? Well, part of that's going to depend on your county's interpretation of this.
What about having a mission statement or a statement of faith?
No.
No.
HSLDA has a statement of faith.
Okay.
We're not a church.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And as a general rule, if I understand it correctly, if you're meeting at somebody's house, the homeowner will be the one that receives the penalty, or they'll get the fine or citation or whatever it is. The citation goes to the location generally where you're at.
I don't know specifically California.
Okay.
New York and New Jersey, where they've had a lot of issues with this, they've been citing everyone.
Okay. Everybody who walks through the door. I've heard that threat for the church, Rob McCoy's church, but then I don't believe it ever happened. So, okay, so I guess that's to be determined. Okay, here's another one that we all were really hoping this was at least some kind of guidance for us for our small groups to get together and have co-op classes. So what about, the small group cohort guidance? So can you explain that a little bit? I understand it doesn't apply to homeschoolers, but I want you to maybe, if you can explain that just a little bit more in depth. And again, this was a big disappointment to me, friends. So
yeah. So this is based on the September 4th guidance that came out, and it is not a model of clarity. It says that if you have groups of children who are in controlled, supervised care environments, and it's a stable group of not more than 14 kids and 2 adults, then they can actually meet together, and they have rules about how this cohort is supposed to meet and not interact with other cohorts. And if that were all that there was, I mean, I actually looked at this at the front and sent to one group and said, hey, this sounds okay, let's jump on it. And then they pointed me to, well, there's something in bold right at the top that says the guidance and directives related to school are not superseded and still apply. And then if you look down at the definition of what a supervised care environment is, this is designed for licensed childcare facilities or nonprofits who are providing childcare, or if you're doing after school care or before school care, or if the school is doing distance learning, but there are some students who are under an IEP that requires a teacher's aid with them, then as long as you do this small group or cohort, then you can actually do it. But the laws the guidance and orders from the governor and Department of Health that apply to schools that came out during the summer that say if you're in a purple or tier 1, you can't do in-person instruction. So it's going to be really difficult to argue, if you're in a tier 1 county, which a lot of groups are going to be, that, hey, we're going to operate just as this little cohort here, even though our county is in tier 1 and in-person instruction isn't allowed. It might work. I don't think it will. And because what I've seen just across the country, talking with groups that are thinking about opening, departments of health are jumping on these groups really fast if they're starting to open for in-person instruction, to find out what's going on and say, no, you can't do that. So if you are going to say, yep, we're going to do it under a cohort, what I've been telling groups since this came out last week is, okay, I don't think that'll work, but if you want to try that, what you should do is go talk with a lawyer and get an actual written opinion from the lawyer. Yes, your group can operate as a cohort under this guidance because X, and get them to put their name on it so that when you get, and it's not if, when you get contacted by the Department of Health, you call up the lawyer and say, hey, you advised us you could open, now it's time to defend us. Unfortunately, I don't know of any lawyers who are going to do that for free. They might be out there, but most, I mean, I've got friends who are lawyers in California, and they're hurting economically just like everyone else is. So that's my take on it. It's pretty obvious this is designed for schools not wanting to be sued under the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act because the student says, I have an IEP that requires in-person instruction. I demand my in-person instruction. Okay, the Department of Health says, fine, public school, you can work with these IEP students and give them their in-person instruction as long as it's just this little cohort so that you don't get sued. That's my take on it anyway.
Yeah, and that's kind of the conclusion I came to reading the FAQs, was that this was really just to accommodate those students. And I do understand that school districts are being sued by parents because of, because of these things. And Orange County is a big one. So that's another situation where it's probably a little bit less likely that it's defensible than other situations. Or do we even want to talk about comparing defensibleness?
This is not one that I would want to try and defend in court. It's just plain going to cost you more money, I think, than it's worth. On the other hand, you might win. I mean, I always try and give groups a range of options, but this one I would put way down the scale at don't try this one. Unless you can get a lawyer who will work for free or for little cost and who will actually put her neck on the line and say, yes, you guys can do that.
Okay. All right. And I also, the way it was explained to me was that this doesn't provide additional openings. This just provides guidance, strict guidance for those that, like the schools that are dealing with the at-risk and special needs kids. This just tells them how they can do that. As you said, it's to keep them from, perhaps just to keep them from being sued. Okay, so what about civil disobedience? You're going to meet anyway. Another thing I would just encourage leaders, is this a matter of conscience for you? Sincerely a matter of conscience, because it really, it needs to be if you're going to move forward anyway. Or is it a matter of pressure from members? If you don't do what I want you to do, I'm going to go find another group. Well, I don't think that, you should be, it shouldn't be an either or situation. Leaders shouldn't be succumbing to do something they don't think is right because they've got a lot of pressure to make their members happy, or they're going to leave. I think you're always going to be safest to stand on your mission statement and do what God's shown you need to do. Also, are you using your group to make a statement, or do you have someone in your group who says, hey, we're going to make a stand here? It's something to remember that, we hear about John MacArthur's church in the news, and they've got a big budget. They can afford this, and that making a stand, making a statement, but can you afford this? Or is this going to put you out of business? Are you going to imperil, your family home, your family business? These are things to think about. Also, the effects on the greater homeschool community. Is this going to, is this going to draw attention to other groups, bringing attention to the greater homeschool community? All of a sudden, oh, we've got these groups that we've got to keep an eye out, and know, as we already talked about, know the consequences. I think that's kind of redundant, but you need to be able to count the cost, because this really, you have to believe in this in order to be moving forward. So now we're going to talk about some of the things we should do. And I want to try to go through these a little bit quicker. I'm trying to keep an eye on the time, because I know we have lots going on this afternoon. And so I want us to have time to be able to talk too. But what things that you should do, all leaders should get insurance. I think every group should have some type of insurance, some kind of liability. And you should also know, if you're deciding, about what to do, to have field trips, to not to have field trips, find out from your insurance provider, what's their limit? What do they require you to have in order for them to still cover you? Another thing is have a COVID-19 specific waiver, and we'll send that out in the follow-up email. We have a sample COVID-19 waiver. So this is something I recommend not letting anybody at your event unless they've signed a waiver. Any kind of group, anytime, I think, should have a waiver. I don't know how, some kind of a liability waiver. I know it doesn't necessarily make you bulletproof, but somehow, I'm going to use that word, I think it makes the leader more defensible if they say, hey, we've got this waiver. I don't know what your thoughts on that are, Darren, but we know if they're following every rule and they have every member sign a waiver and someone still gets sick, does the waiver guarantee you from getting sued? No, not necessarily. No, it really
right.
doesn't.
Here's the thing. Yes, I recommend you have a waiver, but realistically speaking, you guys are in California. Waivers are nice, pretty pieces of paper in your state. They're better than nothing, but it's not like here in Virginia where a waiver is a brick wall. And before COVID, when groups would call up and say, hey, we need a waiver, I'd say, okay, well, my official answer is you should get an attorney to draft one for you. But realistically, just go next door to the big mega church and grab a waiver from them and adapt it to your group. This one, if you're going to be spending money on something, this is where to spend it. Hire an attorney for a couple $100, get each of your members to give an extra $20 or $25 so you can do it, and have them draft a waiver that is actually suited to your group and your situation. Will it work? Honestly, nobody knows at this point.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Have you heard of groups getting sued? Or I've heard of groups getting turned into the health department, not by the police, but having issues with members.
Right.
Yeah.
I've been doing group legal work for about 10 years now. I've run into, I think, 5 different lawsuits across the country. It's not very common that groups get sued. They get threatened a lot more than they actually get sued. But a lawsuit it's an expensive deal, and most people don't want to take it on. The problem here is it might not be the parent making the decision. If the kid gets sick at co-op and that's the only place they've been in the last month, so it's fairly obvious that's where it's going to be, it may be the kids or the parent's medical insurance company who's looking to recoup the money for the kid being in the hospital for 2 days or whatever. It might not be the parents who get to choose to do the lawsuit.
Okay. All right. That's an interesting point. I never thought about that. We had, I don't know what's happening in the rest of the country, but in California, we had in our family a COVID patient who we were with, and we never were contacted by contact tracers. I kept thinking somebody's going to call, somebody's going to email us, or, something like that. And so I just even kind of wonder, all of that seems to be subject to real life. I don't know. Does that make sense? Yeah. And then policies. I think it's important that you have in place a privacy policy and a sick policy. And I'll send you out our sample waiver, a sample, privacy policy, which really basically all you can do is, from my understanding, is tell your families that you will be cooperating with the law to the best of your ability. And as I said here, the county health department is supposed to investigate these cases, but I've read too many news articles that show that there's so many tests taking place that it's taking the labs too long to get results. And then the contact tracing and these types of investigation is still, just doesn't, as our family situation is, it just doesn't happen. And sick policy, just let your families know if your kids are sick, don't come to class, don't come to field trip, that that at least the rest of your families, are feeling that you've done what you can to protect them from this situation. Do you have any comments on these privacy or sick policies, Darren?
Not particularly, except that this is just good to have, whether it's COVID or flu season. Mm-hmm. And these ones, I think parents, even the parents who are going to oppose you doing lots for COVID, they'll generally be okay with this one. Sick policies have been in every co-op I've been in for the last 12 years.
Oh, okay. Okay, great. Okay, so we've gotten to a point where I want to have some discussion time. Diane, if you can go ahead and stop the recording.